Hello and welcome back to Building Global Success, Mastering Change Management in GCCs, where we delve into key elements of building global capability centres and the leadership strategies that make them thrive. I'm your host today, Ray Mead. I'm a consultant in project management, transformation and change, based out of Hampshire in the UK. And I'm thrilled to say I'm joined today by one of our members here at the Leadership Collective. It's Kasey Dudley, Human Resources Director at Advanced Clinical, out of Austin, Texas. Welcome back, Kasey. It's great to talk to you about the change program that you've run and building the Centre of Excellence in India. Today, I wanted to talk about the global and the cultural implications that brings. Which obviously anyone who's kind of worked in that part of the world, but anyone who's worked on any kind of international projects understand that there's a wide area of cultural factors that can impact the effectiveness of these programs in good ways and bad ways as well. So it's more about being aware of what those are and then formulating plans to deal with it. So one of the things when you're launching into a new country, and especially in the way that you've described, there's a question about structure. There's a question about, should it be centralized? Should it be decentralized? So, you're building a new center in India. What's the relationship like with the rest of the organization? How did you go about thinking about that?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's an important consideration because my organization wants to follow the sun. It was important for us to have work that is not client facing, meaning it can be done asynchronously. So during the hours, we were not meeting with our clients. So in looking at the project makeup, it made the most sense for us to have employees who are conducting data review activities for a clinical study to be located outside our core business hours. So while we're a global company, we still operate very much more like an international company. So the US is where we base centralization of our studies, with the exception of the work that we do in Japan. And we knew that our India-based team members who would be part of the integrated solution for our project teams. So that means they would work with the folks in the US and Europe on their assigned studies. So very much an integrated solution, centralized with the US being the base. All that being said, the India-based team members have managers that sit in the US. However, we also have a colleague who stands in as the boots on the ground leader in India to help adjust to company culture, manage the performance expectations, and to help us understand the landscape of the Indian market.
Yeah, I know. I'd imagine that's and it is quite unique, isn't it? How did you approach the cultural aspects of moving into the Indian market?
So this one was actually difficult. So before entering into India, we, as you know, have already been operating in 16 different countries, and we had never offered any formal cultural change training, and it shows. It shows. We hear it from our Japanese and our European colleagues about the lack of cultural awareness of some of our employees in the United States. So there was a bit of a hurdle of selling the importance of cultural training to our leadership team. So working with our on-site partner in India, myself, along with other members of the HR team, we highlighted issues we were already seeing with those cultural differences in the organization and how India has an even greater difference than the organizations and the countries that we're working in today. So it was especially important to cover areas like performance management and communication styles. So ultimately, our argument was so compelling that we are now extending cultural awareness training to everyone in 2025. So, however, to address the more immediate matter, we again turn to our directly impacted groups. So like we talked about in our prior session, those were those data management employees that would have the direct peers in India. So first, our HR business partner that supports India and all of APAC developed a comprehensive interactive training that he conducted live with the managers of the department. So this covered key employment law topics as well, but cultural information and differences. And I sat in on this training and I was really impressed because he took the approach of having leaders talk about their prior experience working with India-based team members. I'm a strong believer of this method that teaching others is the best way to reinforce materials. And so getting the leaders to share their experience and talk about the preconceived notions they had and maybe how that changed over time working with India team members. And so with all that in mind, the leaders then led a similar session for their direct reports, where they were sharing key cultural differences and how the team would work together as part of our integrated solution.
Yeah, fascinating. I'm fascinated by this idea that the cultural training came out of lessons learned from previous engagements and from listening to feedback from your clients and your associates and partners, etc. So, I mean, Japan, for example, is another. It's a very different cultural paradigm. Were you involved in that one too, or was that something you learned the hard way?
So our Japan entity existed already when I got here. The difference about Japan and our organization is that they truly work in a silo. So while everyone else is part of an integrated solution, our Japan team is only supporting one client, and those clients are located in Japan. And so they really just kind of stand as like this satellite group. And so the only way that we've really experienced the cultural differences and training has been voluntary DE&I type things in the organization so far. So we have, I think we call them cafeteria chats. So it's in the evening for Japan, it's lunchtime for Europe, and it's breakfast for the US, right? And we all get together and have conversations about differences, maybe how we celebrate during the holidays, or it might be what does marriage look like in your country in general, just like just random topics that you might want to talk about. And that is it was very informal, and the way that we've started to hear about some of these major differences. And so for us, it was really great to be able to use that feedback from those DE&I initiatives to make a bigger change for our organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love practical solutions like that as well, having those informal chats and things, because the training you mentioned about communication styles being part of it, that's one of, I guess, the classic cross-cultural training often includes Hofstede. I don't know if you covered that, but his 6 cultural dimensions was, communication
Yeah.
styles being one of them, around uncertainty avoidance and things like that, attitudes to time and authority
Oh,
and power distance models, all of those, but again, you can cover that from a formal perspective. I mean, there are issues with Hofstede's research. It's I think it was only conducted around IBM employees globally, which obviously IBM employees are a particular type of profile already, but there's a lot of truth in it, and if you can tease that out and make it practical, like attitudes to time and authority, if you discuss that in an informal way, it can be quite amusing and fascinating for the people involved in the chats, can't it?
yeah, definitely. And I think that's why it was so important for us to have that colleague, that boots on the ground leader in India as well. So we're not just looking at stereotypes of what people interact or how people interact in India. It is having a leader there to observe those behaviors and to reinforce for us the changes we need to make in our approach, or to help them integrate into our company culture, whichever is most appropriate.
Okay, that's good. You mentioned in our first chat that your competitors were already active in India. I've recently worked with one of my clients, not in your industry, but in telecoms industry, and they have significant setups in Cairo in Egypt and in Gurgaon, just outside of Delhi in India. And they found again that their mission is to follow the sun, to be able to support their customers 24/7 with the best available people in those time zones. So but they found that just practical issues, there's the cultural elements that we've discussed, but there's also the fact that because their competitors were already there as well, there was a lot of kind of toing and froing between competitors and things. So while that was good when they first arrived, because they were able to kind of hire people with experience in that field, it was also quite easy to lose people to your competitors. And you know, have you kind of, I guess it's early days, but have you experienced that in any of your other locations, or is that, you know, something that the organization is aware of as a risk?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. And that's such a good point. You know, we did a lot of research about why we were moving to the specific city that we were moving in. It's a lower cost than some of the other cities in India to set up business practices, but a growing area. I mean, it's India, so of course there's already tons of people there, but it's growing even more from an industrial level. And most importantly for us was that partner that we've made. He owns another organization that works in clinical trials as well. He's not a competitor. He has a different service that he offers, but that helped us grow our name recognition quicker in that area. So as we're working against our competitors, we have a partner that's rooting for us. I would also say that other things that we considered were, you know, how often they want pay increases, which is different than what we expect in the United States or in Europe. And then finally, things that we considered were, you know, what benefits do we want to offer? So looking at the market, do we want to allow remote work, or do we want to reserve remote work for maybe after you worked for us a while? Do we want to offer all the way up to leadership positions so that an L visa could be an option for some of these employees in the future? So all of those things were items that we took into consideration.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and something my clients noticed as well, and I've noticed, having done some work in these markets, that the approach to I suppose career development and progression is very different. So very high expectations, which is a good thing, because you know you've got a workforce there that wants to get on. They want to know how to improve. They want to be able, and they want that recognition. So, and it sounds like you've already, you know, built that into kind of individualizing your recognition and reward systems. But yeah, it for my client, it led to something that we call job title inflation, where you had people progressing because of the demand. You know, if you have demand to progress, but you've also got this option that I mentioned before, where you've got perhaps competitors operating. So if you don't get that promotion, you go to the competitor, and that's the way you get the promotion. So it's kind of, how do you prevent that from happening? You know, is there anything you specifically kind of have looked at to balance that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's so funny that you say title inflation. In clinical research, that's just abound. I remember one of my first jobs I had, everyone was the VP of something. And I was like, how is this possible? But one area that we did make a change to was what it is exactly what you're saying, the job levels. So for the same role in our US based operations, there's 3 levels, like the base, the senior, the principal. For our India based employees, we made it into 6 different levels. So because they expect more regular promotions and pay increases, we were able to work that into the model. So our goal is certainly to retain the talent and provide them those growth opportunities. And so making this change was a way for us to, was a change for our thinking, but we're hoping it provides positive outcomes. And as the market gets tighter in the United States, maybe we make some of those changes here as well. Maybe it's a lessons learned for retention overall.
I really like that idea of having, because it was a problem for my client, definitely, where you had kind of people progressing quicker in, you know, overseas markets, but then that was creating a difference or a mismatch in expectations with their clients, for example, because if they were dealing with, say, a project director in Europe or North America, then, you know, they would expect the same level of ability with dealing with the project director out of, you know, India, Asia, North Africa. So yeah, it was a real problem. Their solution, and one that I helped them with, by the way, was kind of creating a very clear competence framework around those kind of job titles, you know, and really kind of making it as transparent as possible. So they accompanied it with an assessment against those competencies. But then by doing that, they were able to then show very specifically what it took to progress through, which, if for some people, if they're not actually automatically progressing through, at least they can see a journey. They can see a way, the things that they can work on in order to kind of make that journey. And it may take some time, but they can see the path. Whereas, if they're not getting any feedback and if they don't have any path to follow, then that's where the dissatisfaction comes in, and they might jump to the competitor as such.
I love that, because I think that so many organizations build career paths. So like, well, here's the career journey, but are you defining for employees how you can actually move from one step to the next? I think that is the hardest part. Is like, I understand that these are the competencies that I need to have to be a director, but what are you, employer, giving me so that I can get to those competencies? What are my options to grow and develop? And so I think it's really important to have that holistic plan. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's really important, and that was the message I gave to my client as well. You can't just assess everybody and then say, right, that's what it takes. You've got to give with one hand, take with another, and actually provide people the means to progress, and that's where the motivation starts to happen. So you mentioned about Japan, how it was different. It was kind of, the team was in a silo, whereas in India, we've got this center that you're creating, but we're just going to have a lot of interaction with the rest of the business. So how did you go about integrating the team at a global level?
Yeah, so I mentioned our HR business partner earlier, who developed that cultural training. He's great. He's located in Ireland, and this is his first time being the business partner in India. So it's a great learning opportunity for him as well. But he and the leadership team for the India-based team members worked closely together on a comprehensive onboarding that oriented the new employees to the organizational culture. So this was almost line item one on the change management plan, was develop comprehensive onboarding. We also initially have the India-based team members working European hours so that they have more regular contact with the existing team members. So right now, that's a challenge for them, right? They're working close to noon to 9 p.m. their time so that they can have more time with existing team members. Next, our on-site partner, he's key to ensuring a successful onboarding as well. He attends all of our leadership meetings and the change management meetings for India, and works directly with the India-based team members to ensure that they're understanding their goals, the processes, and systems. And then our new team members also have an onboarding buddy. So that's a person that's in the same role as them, that's able to guide them through our way of doing things. And our goal here is also to foster relationships across those regional lines so that they're building lasting relationships within the organization. That's their go-to person. And I hope that eventually they're learning from each other. That's the goal.
No, and you mentioned there about teams in India working European hours, which is just about doable, isn't it? But I often find, unfortunately, again, having worked with teams in India before, they often bear the brunt of this because of their location in the world, essentially. And if you've got, as my client does, clients in Hong Kong, Japan, China, and they're kind of dealing with those clients as well. And so in the morning, they're dealing with problems on one side of the world, and then in the evening they're dealing with things on the other side of the world. So I guess, but that's the idea of following the sun, isn't it? I guess, does that mean that you're looking to build capabilities similarly in, say, I don't know, South America or something like that? Is that on the agenda as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I've talked to the Leadership Collective about this before. Right now, we still work in the EOR environment in South America. We're in Argentina, Brazil, and then we also use an EOR for Mexico. And we're continuing to look at that and figure out what will work best. I would also say that, I hear you, our Asia-based team members definitely take on the brunt of having to work a flexible schedule. That being said, please point me into a company that's got it figured out, because besides working asynchronously and getting updates via video or Slack message or Teams, I haven't been able to figure out the best way to do it. I certainly take a 9 p.m. meeting from time to time. I try to avoid those 6 a.m.s, but I will take a 9 p.m. if necessary.
So lastly on this topic, would you say that having reflecting now back on the specifically the India Center of Excellence that you've built, what made it different from, say, a normal kind of merger and acquisition program?
So when I think about our entry into India, it was a greenfield effort. So we did the research of which city we wanted. As I said, we found that partner in that city, found a building to operate from. We got the appropriate licensing, right? So that was all, the base project is set up a entity in India. And at the same time we're doing this, then the change management piece starts filing in with that of, okay, we're getting closer to the entity being established. So now let's start change management efforts. Where are we working with our existing employees? How do we start hiring there? And then really, moving that along with the project. I mentioned our partner a few times, and the business that he has. So we're not merging or acquiring with his business in any way, but I would say it's a benefit because that we're not merging or acquiring, because we don't need to adopt or adjust to another organization's culture. Accommodating a new region's culture is challenging enough without thinking about how a organization worked before they joined our organization. That being said, the approach isn't dissimilar. You still need to do your research about the culture. You need to understand the cultural nuances, and you need to account for them in your onboarding and your integration period. And so if you feel that something's not working, that doesn't mean it won't work. It just means that you need to take a different approach. And so if you're planning for a merger or acquisition, you're going to do all of your due diligence. And so our approach was doing a lot of due diligence on setting up an entity and the legal aspects of working in India. And then as we pulled in the change management piece and the people piece and got ready to hire, then we turned on the cultural approach as well.
So those hard aspects you mentioned about kind of having a good project plan before and how that's really helped you. So that kind of whole failing to plan is planning to fail type aspect as well. I guess that's helped you along the way. But every program has its ups and downs and things. And coming back to the change management training you talked about, I don't know if you covered the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but she's perhaps more famous for talking about the stages of grief, the different stages of grief that you go through. But, people often apply it to change programs as well. They often think about, because change can sometimes feel like a bit of a loss of one world before you realize that there's another world over the horizon. And Kubler-Ross talked about kind of, midway through, you end up with this kind of pit of despair. It's kind of the bit in a film where you think everything's lost before everything, suddenly gets better and resolves itself. Have you experienced anything like that, in this change program or before?
So I would say we haven't yet. Like I said, we're still a little early. I can definitely see instances of shock and denial and frustration, all the things that lead up to that pit of despair. And right now, I feel that we're climbing up the other side to experimentation. Maybe we can share a graphic so our listeners can know what we're talking about here. But that being said, I'm sure that regression is possible. So the leadership team and I have discussed that the first time a major obstacle arises, perhaps a missed deliverable or worse, a lost client, when an India-based team member is involved, that's going to be a major time when we could regress backward down the slope. So it would be completely understandable that employee would correlate that issue or that concern with the India-based team. So to mitigate this risk, we continue to have our open forums where folks can talk about their concerns or any other risks that they see. And next, we really focus on celebrating success as well. So just like we acknowledge our mistakes or our losses, we want to ensure that we're celebrating when something goes right with that team. But yeah, I mean, I'll have to check back in with you if I catch wind of our pits of despair happening on the team. But so far, so good.
Excellent. Good to hear about it. Thanks very much, Kasey, for today, and I'll talk to you again very soon.
Great. Talk soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe or leave a review and share it with others. You can also find mine and Kasey's LinkedIn profiles in the show notes if you want to connect with us, either of us directly, which we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode, where we continue exploring leadership and global growth in the world of GCCs.